Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Weaver. Welcome to the Audio Analyst. Pardon me. Today, I want to explore a topic that is both especially important and yet rarely talked about: our individual inherent listening biases, our audio hot buttons, if you prefer. First, we all have them, and they can have a huge impact on how we react to the sounds recreated by any system that we hear. Over the decades, with so many published reviews, show reports, and commentaries, I've been able to share, explain, and defend my own biases, both by discussing them directly and by the inferences throughout the body of my work. I've done so to be as transparent and forthright as I can be with my audience so that they may more fully understand the significance of what I'm hearing and why it matters. And I might suggest that if you have been a follower of my work for any length of time, that it is most likely because you share a similar set of listening biases and sensibilities. But today I want to address this topic in a way that can perhaps help listeners better identify and understand why they listen the way they do and how that impacts the elements of the playback that matters the most to them. I'll walk you through my personal considerations, explaining them, some in greater detail than others, to expand on and clarify why they are important. I really feel that with a clearer understanding of such matters, I may be able to help raise your awareness of and to help you to identify and prioritize your own preconceptions, which might just save you a few unnecessary rounds on the upgrade merry-go-round. The first matter that should be quite apparent, but somehow isn't always obvious, are our musical preferences. Now, why is the type of music we listen to important? Let me use an example of two listeners who walk into a system demo where the exhibitors are using a very well-regarded source, exquisite electronics and cabling, and are featuring a new pair of exotic two-way stand-mounted monitors. After a nice 40-minute long demo, over which the room host played numerous requested cuts from both listeners' playlist, the two leave the room with drastically different opinions. Listener 1 found the system to sound totally unacceptable, while listener 2 fell head over heels in love with its performance. They both heard exactly the same thing, yet they came away with distinctly different opinions. How can that be? In this example, listener 1 listens primarily to classic and progressive rock, heavy metal, and some larger scale orchestral classical works, kind of like me. Listener 2 listens almost exclusively to vocal and chamber music. Do you see how that might matter significantly? Even the most engaging, well-executed two-way monitors available today, with fine tonal balance and excellent resolution, can neither offer any significant output below about 40 or 45 hertz, nor meet the dynamic scaling required to accurately recreate the types of music that listener 1 enjoys. But for listener 2, neither of those considerations is especially problematic. The only difference here are the listener's personal biases based upon their typical musical diets. Next up, we want to build a system that can provide the greatest degree of true resolve possible. To be clear, my use of the term resolute here does not mean bright, spotlit, or hyper-detailed, nor is it code for excessive upper mid-range or treble energy. True resolution uncovers detail and nuance, revealing microdynamic subtleties such as superior refinement and accuracy of instrumental tone, color, and texture, or particularly fine transient information. It is indicative of an enhanced ability to follow a single instrumental line deep within dense, convoluted arrangements, or by the depiction of a starker sense of the space between and around images within the soundstage. Improving resolution may only be achieved through increased or improved clarity. Superior clarity is achieved through diminishing or completely stripping away anything other than the applied signal by removing mechanical impediments, impurities, or pollutants, reducing spurious noise or other non-essential artifacts that combine with or somehow impede the original signal, thereby contaminating and degrading its purity. Typically, such advances come by improving and advancing a circuit or mechanical design, and or by applying new and unique materials, leading to lower distortions in the form of a more linear or less reactive response to the driving signal, or the reduction of otherwise self-induced noise, both electrically and or mechanically. Such improvements result in the unmasking of previously obscured information, not by enhancing or emphasizing any specific bandwidth or frequency range. In short, I would apply the term unmasking to express what true resolution represents. And in the end, resolution serves its unforgiving master, transparency. But why is transparency so important? Starting in the mid-1990s, I was reporting on the importance of transparency and how it contributes to the enjoyment of the music recreated by our systems. As an example of what I mean, the greater the system's resultant resolution and transparency, the more likely it would be for all the low-level noises captured on our recordings, like creaking chairs, air handlers, coughing or sneezing audience members, even doors being opened and closed or unexpected footfalls, to be revealed more clearly as what they actually are, rather than just being offered up as some less discriminate, masked, unidentifiable sound. Now, this attribute affords the psychoacoustic effect, allowing the mind to follow the flow of the music, without the subconscious distraction or interruption to that flow created by trying to identify an otherwise unresolvable sound. When your system can transparently reveal a noise to be exactly what it is, say a creaking chair, your mind doesn't give it a second thought. It recognizes the sound immediately, and because of its familiarity, it does not get distracted trying to make sense or trying to identify what that sound was. In essence, it can ignore what would otherwise have been a distraction and just continue to flow along with the musical stream without interruption or diversion. It's a really interesting effect. Next up are low frequency extension and speed. Guys, if bass performance isn't tonally truthful, accurately extended, and distinctly pitch defined, the rest of the system performance suffers from its overall fidelity of tone color and octave-to-octave balance to the representation and recreation of the acoustic signature of the venue in which the recording was captured. Systems that cannot faithfully recreate bass down into the subsonic regions, recall my second audio axiom, simply cannot regenerate the same sense of space and focus as those that do. The full breadth and air of the soundstage, the complete depth and width of the acoustic environment, even the fundamental octave-to-octave tonal balance, just don't develop to their full potential when the system cannot accurately reproduce the information below 40 Hertz. I wish it weren't true, but it's how it is. And I can't explain exactly why, but I can demonstrate it every time. Next, I want to touch on tone characteristics, specifically attributes like harmonics and timbre. The richness of a sound created by a musical instrument can be described in terms of the sum of the distinct combined frequencies from which it is formed. The lowest, the fundamental frequency, and the pitch it produces are typically used to name the note. But there are many other significant frequencies, overtones of the fundamental frequency, which may include harmonics and partials. Now, there are occasionally subharmonics at whole number divisions of the fundamental frequency. And while most instruments produce harmonic sounds, there are those that only produce partials and inharmonic tones, such as bass and snare drums, cymbals, triangles, tambourines, and castanets, and other indefinite pitched instruments. The timbre of sound, often referred to as tonal color, is also greatly affected by an abundance of other aspects that constitute a note's harmonic envelope. Things like the attack speed and characteristics, its decay, sustain, and subsequent release, a group of attributes collectively referred to as the ADSR envelope, as well as transients. The honesty and faithfulness of your system's ability to accurately create the harmonic and timbral envelopes have an enormous effect on the resultant fidelity with which our systems are able to recreate the sounds of the instruments they play back. If your sources, electronics, cabling, or speakers are unable to maintain a uniform tonal characteristic across the entire audio spectrum, and this is more especially problematic for things like phono cartridges and loudspeakers, if they offer even slightly different sonic characteristics from octave to octave, or those qualities vary with the amount of applied power, the integrity of these crucial harmonic and tonal envelopes will be severely compromised, which is why timbral fidelity is so important. Next up, I have to touch on the stereo mono consideration. I know many listeners who absolutely adore the tonal and textural qualities of some of their mono recordings. Now, while I understand, in general, I see monophonic recording as a flawed, completely unnatural way of recording, even though it was all music listeners had until the mid-1950s. Modern stereophonic technology was invented by British engineer Alan Blumlein, working at Electric and Musical Industries, or EMI, who applied for a United Kingdom patent for binaural sound on December 14, 1931. The patent was granted June 14, 1933, and encompassed stereo records, stereo films, and even surround sound. But it wasn't until November of 1957 that Audio Fidelity Records, a then tiny New York City label, released the first mass-produced stereophonic disc. Side 1 featured the Dukes of Dixieland, while Side 2 featured recordings of steam and diesel locomotives, as well as other sound effects chosen to engage and envelop listeners. And so, the modern era of stereo playback was launched. To begin with, those of us with relatively normal hearing, people who have not experienced congenital hearing loss or otherwise suffered damage to one or both ears, have never heard anything in mono in our lives. Our default ear-brain system is not terribly unlike a set of stereo microphones. In fact, the original Blumlein microphone setup reflects that clearly. But let me explain. Let's say you walk into a restaurant, pre-pandemic restrictions, and get seated at a table. Maybe the bar is to your right, and there are tables with guests to your left and behind you. When someone at the bar speaks, you perceive the sound of their voice as coming from your right. When someone at the tables to your left or behind you speaks or raises a toast, you perceive that sound to your left or behind you. You don't think about it. You're simply understanding where the sounds are coming from. Because we are binaural creatures, the ear-brain mechanism has become adept at decoding the slight differences at each ear in these sounds' arrival times and amplitudes, allowing us to effortlessly interpret where the sound or sounds originated. Recent research has shown that the brain can readily differentiate differences in arrival times as small as 1/100,000th of a second. Spectacular. Now, while every venue is unique, when you choose the proper seats in a theater or symphony hall for an orchestral performance, typically as centrally located on the center line of the theater or hall as possible, and in rows from 5 to 12, or maybe even a little further in. Once the orchestra starts performing, you not only see that first violins are located to your far left, that location and distance is clearly audible as well. The same with cellos, slightly to the right, and the double basses to the far right. Flutes and clarinets are a little further distant and only slightly left of center, with oboes and bassoons about the same distance away, but slightly right of center. Trombones and tubas are also right of center, but slightly further away than the oboes and bassoons. Percussion is slightly further away yet, but behind the clarinets and flutes. Your mind has no difficulty locating and interpreting these sounds and their locations, even with your eyes closed. We perceive everything in stereo. Even when a friend is sitting in our living room or out on our deck on a summer evening, playing an acoustic guitar and singing. We can easily distinguish the differing heights, locations, and shapes and sizes of the sounds generated by the guitar's strings, its resonant body and sound hole, and our friend's voice. So it is with our two-channel audio systems. These are among attributes we have termed imaging and sound staging. When listening to mono recordings, while they can often provide some depth to the recordings, everything emanates from an indiscriminate glob located somewhere midway between your speakers. This is so unnatural to me as to make it impossible to enjoy, regardless of any other exceptional sonic characteristics the system under evaluation may have to offer. For me, no matter how well a given product may perform in any and every other category, if it cannot correctly recreate the space of the recording and accurately locate the instrument's positions throughout the stage with correctly sized and shaped voices, it won't find a permanent home in my system. And anyone who argues that sound staging and imaging are simply artifacts of stereo recording are only fooling themselves. This is how we hear in our daily existence, and it simply makes sense to capture recordings in a manner that more closely approximates our daily reality of binaural existence. I could go on, but hopefully you've gotten the point and can begin to evaluate what is truly most important to you and why, perhaps allowing for more effective compromises with your buying decisions in the future. I will add that once you experience exceptionally accurate, finely resolving, and authentically musical gear, if you're anything like me, you'll find it next to impossible to move backward. I would rather part with some dough to maintain that elevated degree of realism and authenticity rather than sacrifice those lofty sonic gains. Hopefully my wife isn't watching tonight. With that, I'll remind you that if you find any merit or value in the information I'm sharing here, please subscribe, like, and share links to episodes with your friends. And I love hearing from you, so be sure to leave your comments and questions. And you may support the channel using Patreon, Venmo, or PayPal, or even by securing display advertising at the Audio Analyst website. And links for all those options are provided in today's description section. As always, thank you for taking the time to drop by and visit today. Please be sure to stay safe and keep the music playing. Till next week, cheers.